called again. Brilliant, excellent, superb. Nothing cries desperation like repetition. Many others die off quite quickly, unable to handle the information I relate. Many others quite literally die off because of the information I relate. Those namby-pamby, weak of heart sunshine heroes have no place in this battle. They should have stayed home and been consumers of video games and fast food. You, though, are clearly made of sterner stuff. Now be quiet and listen. Prepare for what you must hear, even if you dread what it might do within you once you digest this anecdotal evidence of a deadliness undreamt of. Her name, Bibiana Ramos, 14. Sometimes women cause men to go all to pieces. Other women find satisfaction and accomplishment in putting the pieces back together again. In this case, little Bibiana Ramos finds a puzzling man only she can complete. Location, Chadron, Nebraska, USA. Date, August 2014. Everyone that grew up near the woods or in the woods can relate to finding odd things or experiencing weird events in or around the woods they knew. I, for one, became familiar with abandoned homes from centuries earlier, and ancient bottles buried in the muck of the local forest of my youth. Old things indeed love to linger forgotten in forested areas, but usually it takes an adventurous person to go into the woodland and find these things. In this case, the item came out of the woods to greet one, Bibiana Ramos. Bibiana was a 14-year-old girl without much of a social life, nor any friends worth mentioning, nor siblings to recklessly tease or follow about, and it made Bibi into a very bored teenager. It was no aid to her plight that her parents were endlessly busy in their work lives, as they slaved to pay for health care costs in a time of affordable health care. And from the Pavlovian benefits of work came the Pavlovian addiction to work, pulling Bibiana's parents even further afield. Bibiana lived in her own world, in her own space, without much grounding from others. It gave her a plethora of hours to while away in daydreams or creativity, and from her blossoming female desires, she had ample time to dream of romance. Naturally, the first man that would reach out to her would be in hideous shape. They always are. This one came crawling, clawing to her out of the woods near her home, secluded far from the huddled huts of Chadron, Nebraska. This man was not quite so much a man as he was, well, let me tell you so. While loafing on her back porch in August 2014, Bibi saw something moving in the undergrowth of the forested area bordering her yard. As she wrote a short story in a journal of hers, Bibiana kept note of the scuttling thing digging around in the dried leaves and knocking into small saplings as it shuffled east to west. She figured it was some kind of rat or bubbling groundhog. And then it began to make a beeline for her deck. And she was becoming more intrigued by the creature's lack of natural motivation. Animals would readily scamper away from any human activity, but not this thing. And the closer it came, the weirder it looked. Until it was only a few yards away, and Bibiana believed she was getting approached by a huge tarantula. She panicked and screamed in fear, and then waited to see it continue its approach. It took several minutes to get close to the porch, And then she spied its true grotesque form. This thing was a disembodied human hand, grown dirty and damaged over time, but able to operate independent of the human it once belonged to. Bibiana screamed again and again, and then waited for the hand to slowly climb up a couple of steps, arduous as that was for these dislocated digits, and emerge on the platform where Bibi sat that afternoon. Little Bibi contemplated screaming again, but it was too boring. So she walked away to a corner of the porch and took possession of a garden tool to push and probe the hand about, keeping it easily away from her. All the while, the teenager was trying to understand how this human hand could move and retain some modicum of sentience. To whom did it belong? Where was the owner? How did this hand become lost from its owner? Was it a space alien from the Pleiades or Zeta Reticuli? Several times it grabbed her jabbing trowel and forcefully ripped it from her ineffective grip to toss it a couple of feet away. She noted that this hand was thick and tough and masculine, as well as ornery and persistent. It wanted her. But that was another detail not necessary to this retelling. The hand was covered in dirt and had long nails, cracked or ripped away by the struggle to remain mobile, and on the fourth finger of this left hand was a large and tastelessly gaudy ring with plenty of ornate craftsmanship and a wonderful glassy stone of some sort. This unusual feature made Bibiana all the more curious. She was devising a plan to trap it inside a box or empty flower pot when it finally made an obtuse move that would perplex her into closer relationship with it. The emancipated extremity found her journal, which Bibiana had abandoned, and began writing in it. It was a relentlessly uncoordinated scrawl, but it was legible. Need help. Obviously, snorted the girl, as if that wasn't apparent. It went on to write, help me. I'm still alive somewhere. Further fascination grew in the young woman, and she took the hand inside and washed it down, giving it a home in her closet. Her parents were kept unaware of this marvelous mystery, but it wasn't difficult to obscure its presence from them. In the afternoon, she'd take it from her closet and let it write notes. Nothing was too enlightening, but it did scribble on and on about fear and sorrow, and then finally wrote, Pedro Vial Expedition of 1805. As it finished the note, perking up the girl's attentive mind, a mildly forceful knock emanated from her back door, the porch door, and she found herself face to face with another disembodied hand. It was similar to the first hand in all ways, just a mirror copy sans ring. Bibi took it in and washed it down to introduce it to its brother, and both hands shook, greeting each other in mutual success. Together, they could hold down paper and write much more effectively. A curse on us, on me, the hands loosely slathered from the pen strewn on her desk. Left for dead. Indians. Bibi tried talking to the hands, but they couldn't hear. They merely knew she was there via touch. Be vigil for more of me, they wrote, and then became despondent. Resting, perhaps. Bibi wasn't sure what to make of the pair. She merely stashed them away in her closet, in a closed box for the next days, until another unusual afternoon when she was again alerted to a visitor at her porch door. This time it was the head of a man. It was a Spanish man with straggly dark hair and a mustache, and its severed stump would make it lop about as it rolled and rolled, trying to get her attention. Finally, her eyes and its eyes met through the sliding glass window. She stared in disgust, almost horror, as it had a steely and intense gaze drilling into her soft features with determination the girl had never witnessed before. And then it stuck out its long tongue to reveal a large gold coin. A doubloon! 8 escudos! A small prize indeed. Bibi opened her door and took the coin, cautiously, from the stranger's mouth, examining it. While she did, the disembodied head rolled into the family room, past her befuddled figure, and over her feet. It dirtied up the place with abandon for better manners, until she grabbed it and gave it a thorough bathing down. And then Bibi reunited the head with its hands. Unfortunately, the head had no vocal cords, so it mouthed words, and the hands wrote. His name was Pablo Serrano, he wrote. He was a member of Pedro Vial's 1805 campaign to find and arrest Lewis and Clark as they trod on sovereign Spanish soil. But they ran across various Indians that led them astray. Once the army had blundered across a long occulted and blighted feature of the Americas, the Fountain of Youth. Pablo spun the tale of how it was hidden from the world by local Indians. It was arcane and blasted by calamitous properties, and several of the Vial mission, including Pablo, had drunk from the refreshing waters, to never know death or decay or disease again. Once the sentries of the local Indian tribe came upon the unwitting partakers from Spain, they led and lured the men around and around in search of Lewis and Clark until the tribal warriors could separate and murder each man that had become, through the use of the fountain, immortal. Each man, like Pablo, was chopped into pieces and buried deeper than a corpse, with heavy stones pinning down each bit to keep it inoperable, until the earth itself, this world, would dissolve in the far future. However, Pablo was able to worm out of his encasements after a couple of centuries, yet his arms and legs and torso was still there, affixed beneath tons of earth and rubble and dirt, waiting to be rejoined with their like. Pablo pleaded for the girl to help him, and in time, actually almost instantly, her heart melted and she fell in love with this unusual man and his bizarre predicament. And so began a quest. His head and hands were to accompany her on long walks into the forests of Nebraska's northern areas, where she would slowly dig out, piece by piece, this deconstructed man. One day she was able to find his left leg, then his right foot. A week later, his left foot and right leg, and then his right arm. All of them were many feet down, grown over by vegetation, and requiring long hours to excavate. But they were found and washed, and knitted together in front of Bibi's eyes via some supernatural influence granted by the waters of the Fountain of Youth. They only lacked the central torso now. An eager and delighted face greeted Bibiana daily from her closet. It would silently tell her that it loved her, that it was indebted to her, and that it would deliver unto her the most exquisite treasure he would have with him when his corpse was reunited with limbs and cranium. Pablo was eager, but oh so patient. She would roam with him for weeks until they located the torso. Pablo's head and hands were able to sense it and communicate to Bibi where it would be found once they crossed over it. It was aside a creek, The next day, she brought all the parts of Pablo Serrano in a backpack to bring life to a complete man, a man over 200 years' age. And despite the toil, aided by the arms and hands of the long-suffering man, Bibiana was to dig far and wide enough to roll a sizable boulder off of the chest of Pablo's core flesh, and without delay, all the pieces flung themselves onto the cadaver to reattach and reanimate this man. He stood up and stumbled outward into the creek to clean off the clay and muck from the flesh and shards of his olden Spanish uniform. Pablo rose from the fresh water to glint in the late afternoon sun and smile in his accomplishment. He had beaten death. He had beaten the elements. He had cheated his Indian foes and survived their imposed law, their brutal and inhuman punishment. And now he was whole, vital, young, and powerful, in a new world he would discover with time. Pablo turned to his savior, the brave girl that was enthralled by the man she helped resurrect, and he held out his hands, striding to her, with a gleam in his eyes and a warm smile across his timeless countenance. She in turn held up her hands to greet him, to clasp his hands and celebrate his freedom. Yet his hands glided between hers, and instead of displaying elated rejoice, grasped the child by her thin neck, squeezing gently, lovingly, tighter and tighter. I give you the greatest gift I know and have, my darling, Pablo boldly stated. The gift of death. Inescapable death, the peace of finality in which mortals can find their rewards. Rewards we will never have while cursed by immortality. Oh, how I wish to die all these centuries. Bibiana's silent scream would fade with the light in her eyes, as she could do nothing against this man. She accepted her end, understanding that he wasn't such a bad guy after all. He was just a little old-fashioned.
Like and subscribe before I die! And ring the little bell or you will surely go to hell.
Oh, we're telling spooky stories. This is not a spooky story. Oh, there's no way in the hot pack is
it depends how you look at it. It is kind of spooky.
I guess so.
Wait, that's it? That's the end of the story?
That is a